I'm Alex Carter, 35 years old. I've spent most of my life quietly playing the disappointment role my family cast me in. But this story isn't about how they've seen me. This is about how after one humiliating dinner, I decided I was done being their punching bag. 2 weeks ago, my mom turned 60. My brothers Josh and Eric helped plan a big dinner for her at a fancy restaurant downtown. Honestly, I was excited about it. I saved up and bought her this gorgeous vintage record player she'd been eyeing for years. I even paid extra for rush shipping to make sure it got there in time. I arrived early that evening, eager to help. I set up the gift table, helped the restaurant staff fix their Bluetooth issues. It was typical they couldn't get the speaker to work and checked everything twice. I wanted it to be perfect. This was my mom's night, and I hoped that maybe this time my effort would be enough. Josh flew in from California with his wife and kids. Eric drove up from his suburban house with his family in tow. Even Aunt Stella showed up, and she usually avoided gatherings like these. At first it was nice. The food was great. People were laughing, everyone catching up over wine and appetizers. But when it came time for the speeches, everything turned. Dad was the first to stand glass raised high. His speech started off well enough, talking about his and Mom's long marriage, how proud he was of the family they'd built. Then he dropped the line that made the table erupt. We raised 3 sons together, well, 2.5 maybe. Chuckles all around. I forced a smile and took a long sip of water. My stomach tightened, but hey, Dad's humor was always like that. Then Mom stood. She was emotional, teary-eyed, looking around the table like she couldn't believe how lucky she was. And then, with a perfect mixture of sentimentality and cruelty, she said, "I'm so blessed. I have 2 wonderful sons, Josh, the brilliant surgeon saving lives, Eric, the incredible lawyer who just made partner, and one who's still delivering pizza at 35. The table roared with laughter. People were howling. I sat there gripping my glass so tightly my knuckles turned white. But it didn't stop. Josh leaned in. "Remember when you said you'd be running your own company by now?" More laughter. His wife added, "At least he finally stopped crashing on our couch." I stayed at their place for 2 weeks 5 years ago while my apartment was being repaired from a flood. 2 weeks, and I brought dinner every night as thanks. Dad piled on. "Some kids never grow up, but we love them anyway." Even my 16-year-old nephew sitting across from me chimed in. "Uncle Alex still living in Grandma's basement, huh?" "I haven't lived at home since college. I have my own apartment, downtown." Aunt Stella added her 2 cents. "Maybe next year he'll get a real job." That's when I knew I had to leave. I set my glass down, quietly stood, and walked out. No one stopped me, no one even noticed at first. The only thing that stayed behind was my credit card at the bar to pay for that record player. A gift for a woman who just mocked me in front of her friends and family. For hours, my phone stayed silent. No one texted, no one called. Around midnight, Mom finally sent a casual text. "Where'd you go?" I didn't bother replying. But here's what none of them knew and what none of them ever bothered to ask. Yeah, I deliver pizzas 3 nights a week. Not because I have to, because I want to. 6 years ago, I quietly started a small business, a payment processing platform tailored for small businesses. It's not glamorous. You wouldn't see a commercial for it during the Super Bowl. But it works. It helps small business owners manage cash flow, process payments smoothly, and keep their lights on. I bootstrapped it. Every dollar came from me. No investors, no loans. And you know what, it does it well enough that I've been quietly, anonymously helping every single person at that dinner table for years. When Josh struggled to open his private practice and was drowning in student loans, I anonymously paid off nearly $150,000 of his med school debt. When Eric needed help scraping together a down payment for that picture-perfect suburban house, an anonymous client gift of $130,000 appeared in his account. That was me. When my parents' roof collapsed last winter and insurance refused to cover the repairs, I filed a special appeal, paid $122,000 out of pocket through my company to cover the balance, and never said a word. Aita. For years, I've been quietly covering their mortgage payments, their car loans, their kids' tuition, even their credit card debt. They lived comfortably because of me. I never told them. I didn't want them to feel obligated or embarrassed. I just wanted to help. But after that dinner, I realized they didn't respect me. They didn't know me. They didn't even like me. So 2 days later, I logged into my business accounts and shut it all down. Every automatic payment I'd set up, canceled. Every mortgage assistance, every quiet bank transfer, every tuition top-off stopped. Nothing illegal, nothing vengeful, just no more safety net. And then I waited. It took about 2 weeks before the panic began. The first text came early one morning from Mom. "Card declined at Starbucks. What's going on?" Chris texted next. "Mortgage is showing unpaid, says we're months behind. Why?" Dad chimed in. "Truck being repossessed. What's happening? Call me." Josh's wife. "They froze our accounts. Tuition's late. What's going on?" I ignored them all. Calls, texts, emails, even desperate messages through mutual friends. Nothing from me. They never understood me, never cared to. They labeled me the pizza guy and laughed at me behind my back and right to my face. Meanwhile, I was keeping them afloat, paying their bills, fixing their messes. Now I was done. But here's the funny thing. In their panicked messages, no one apologized for that dinner. No one said, "Hey, we didn't realize we hurt you." No one asked, "Are you okay?" All they cared about was their frozen accounts, their missed payments, their repossessions. That told me everything I needed to know. I was finally free. In the first few days after pulling the financial plug, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: stillness. There was no ding of my phone at odd hours with urgent requests, no passive-aggressive texts disguised as updates on their lives. My apartment felt quieter, cleaner somehow, as if the absence of their constant need had cleared the air itself. But beneath that stillness was an ache I hadn't admitted to myself before. For all their dismissal, all the snide remarks and cheap shots, they were my family. And part of me still craved their approval, or at least their understanding. That craving was a trap. I knew that now, so I let the ache sit like a bruise you stop touching because you know poking it won't help. I had lived my life trying to prove myself to people who decided long ago that I wasn't worth seeing. It was time to see myself. I kept working. Delivering pizzas 3 nights a week wasn't about money. It never had been. It was my field research. Talking to owners of small restaurants, watching how they took payments, seeing where they struggled. My entire business had been built on that informal market research. That's why my software felt so intuitive to small business owners. I designed it, standing on linoleum floors behind pizza counters and dusty registers. The uniform was my camouflage, but also my vantage point. On Thursday night, after a brutal rainstorm soaked the city and my last delivery left me dripping on a stranger's porch, I got a call from Rico, my manager. "Hey Alex," he said, "thought you should know. Your brother Chris called here today, 4 times, asking when you're well scheduled next. Said it was urgent family stuff. I told him you were off tonight, but he didn't sound like he was giving up." I felt my stomach tighten. Chris didn't leave things alone. He was the kind of guy who believed that the louder you knock, the more entitled you are to an answer. But the image that stuck with me wasn't Chris pounding my apartment door. It was him showing up at my workplace, dragging our family drama into the place where I actually felt respected. The next night, I decided to take that risk head on. I showed up for my shift early and warned Rico, who just chuckled. "Family drama means better tips, man. Bring 'em in." That made me laugh harder than I expected. Maybe I wasn't dreading this confrontation as much as I thought. Maybe I was ready for them to see the real me in my apron and hat standing right where I belonged. Sure enough, around 8 p.m., Chris walked through the door and he didn't come alone. He brought Dad. They looked out of place in their tailored coats, water still dripping from their expensive umbrellas. Chris's face was tight-set in that lawyer look of his, the one that said he'd already prepared his opening statement, cross-examined the witnesses, and delivered his closing argument before he even spoke a word. I didn't stop folding pizza boxes when they approached. "What's up?" I said, casual as a breeze. Dad jumped in before Chris could unleash whatever speech he'd rehearsed. "Alex, something's going wrong with the accounts," he said. His voice low but urgent. "We haven't been able to pay the mortgage this month. The truck's being repossessed. Your mother's freaking out. We need to know, do you know anything about this?" That was the opening. The moment where I could have spilled everything right then. Instead, I just smiled and said, "That sounds rough, Dad. Maybe you should talk to your financial advisor. I'm just the pizza guy, remember?" The words slid out with more venom than I intended, but it felt good watching Dad flinch. He wasn't used to me pushing back. Chris's face turned red immediately. "Don't play dumb, Alex," he snapped. "This all started right after you stormed out of Mom's party. Your timing is too convenient. What did you do? Did you mess with our accounts somehow?" I gave a short laugh and shook my head. "You're giving me a lot of credit, Chris. But it's funny. All these years you acted like my career was a joke, and now suddenly I'm the puppet master pulling all your financial strings. That's quite a leap, don't you think?" Dad stepped forward, then placing a hand on Chris's shoulder as if trying to keep him from blowing up entirely. "Alex, please, your mother hasn't slept in days. Just come home and talk to us. Let's figure this out as a family." There it was, the irony. The family that had mocked me for years suddenly calling it our family when the house of cards began to crumble. I wanted to ask them where this warm inclusivity had been when I needed them, but I bit my tongue. Not yet. I wasn't done making my point. "I can't talk now," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "I've got deliveries. You know, pizza guy stuff." I nodded toward the door. "Maybe next time call ahead." Chris's temper boiled over. He grabbed my arm as I tried to walk past and hissed, "This isn't over." His grip was tight, but I yanked free, staring him dead in the eye. "It is for tonight," I said, and walked away without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. The confrontation should have felt like a win, like I'd reclaimed some power. But the truth is, it left me unsettled. Even as I ignored their dozens of missed calls and desperate voicemails piling up on my phone, a part of me wondered, what would they do next? Would they finally realize where all that money had been coming from? Would they even care, or would they just blame me more? The next morning brought a surprise. I opened my company email while drinking my coffee, and there it was, an inquiry through our website's general contact form. No name attached, but the email address was unmistakable. Danielle, my sister-in-law, she hadn't emailed me directly. Instead, she was posing as a prospective client asking about financial consulting services. I sat back and grinned. The dots were connecting faster than I expected. That email was a symbol, a crack in their facade. For years, they'd built this image of me as the loser, the family embarrassment. And now, when their carefully curated financial lives were falling apart, who were they turning to? My company. The one they laughed at. The one they never asked about. Later that day, my mom sent a text inviting me to dinner at their house that Sunday. "The whole family will be there," she wrote. "We need to talk. No mention of money, no direct apology, just an invitation, like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't humiliated me in front of everyone." Out of curiosity, I drove past their house Sunday evening around the time dinner would have been in full swing. The driveway was packed. Every car I recognized, even Aunt Stella's old Buick. A family meeting. About me, without me, a lot. I parked down the block, opened my laptop, and logged into the financial dashboards I'd built for my company's backend. I could see it all in real time. Chris had taken out an emergency payday loan that morning, at rates that would bleed him dry in weeks. Josh and Danielle had tapped into their kids' college fund. My parents had called their bank 17 times in the past 7 days. The facade was crumbling fast, and they were scrambling exactly as I knew they would. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My nephew, the same nephew who'd joked about me still living in Grandma's basement. His text was simple. "Hey, Uncle Alex, everyone's freaking out about you. Dad says you're having mental problems, but I don't think that's true. What's really going on?" That hit differently. He was 16, not old enough to understand all the dynamics, but old enough to notice the cracks. I stared at his message a long time before typing back, "Nothing's going on. Just busy with work." It felt cruel, but I wasn't ready to let anyone off the hook yet, especially not Chris. Before I left, I watched Chris storm out of my parents' house, slamming the door so hard it rattled. He peeled out of the mile driveway like a petulant teenager. Family dinner hadn't gone as planned. Good. When I finally returned to my apartment, my neighbor popped her head out and told me people had been pounding on my door for almost half an hour earlier that evening. She didn't know who they were, but said they seemed upset. I thanked her and locked my door behind me, double-checking that it was bolted tight. Then I did something I should have done long ago. I checked every email and voicemail I'd ignored over the past 2 weeks. Dozens upon dozens. Each message more desperate than the last, but none of them contained what I was waiting for: an apology. No remorse, no acknowledgement of their cruelty, just panic about their crumbling finances. And then I saw it. Another email from Danielle, this time sent directly to me. "I found your company website. I know what you've been doing. We need to talk, just you and me. No one else knows yet." At last, the truth was beginning to surface. As I poured myself a drink, I realized something strange. Part of me was excited now. For years I had lived in the shadows of their judgment, letting them define me. But that was over. Next time they would meet me on my terms. And I wasn't going to hide anymore, but so. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the city still in its hush, the streets below empty except for a lone delivery truck unloading crates at the corner bodega. The light creeping through my blinds felt different that day, almost like a spotlight. Danielle knew. She was the first to put the pieces together. But what would she do with that knowledge? I poured myself a strong coffee, my hands steady. For the first time in a long time, my mind felt clear. No panic, no guilt, no second guessing, just a strange, quiet certainty. Whatever happened next, I was going to control the pace. They weren't going to run this narrative anymore. By mid-morning, as I sat working on a new feature for the payment platform, something elegant but simple, a real-time dashboard for small business owners, the buzzer rang. I glanced at the camera feed. It was Danielle standing there alone, no makeup, hair unkempt, wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt. She looked exhausted, and for the first time, maybe even a little scared. I let her in. When I opened the door, she stepped inside fast, almost as if afraid someone might see her entering. Clutching her phone tightly, she looked around my apartment like she didn't know where she was. Which, symbolically, she didn't. In all these years, none of them had ever set foot in my place. To them, this was just some invisible corner of my failure life they could mock from a safe distance. Now she was standing in it, breathing its air. "You built this place yourself, didn't you?" she said, eyes on the clean but simple furnishings. No pretension, no designer labels, no status symbols, just quiet evidence of a man who lived carefully and deliberately. "Yeah," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Want coffee?" She shook her head. "No, I have questions, Alex." Her voice cracked on my name as if calling me that was already a concession. She sat on the edge of my couch phone, still in a death grip, and finally looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "You've been helping us financially all these years, haven't you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I sat across from her and held her gaze calmly. "Why do you think that I asked?" She laughed bitterly. "Because suddenly every problem we've been ignoring for years exploded at once. It's like some invisible safety net disappeared overnight. And then last night, I found your company's website. I recognized the name immediately. I can't believe it. But I can't not believe it either." That was the twist she hadn't prepared for, seeing my company name in black and white, the testimonials from real clients, the scope of what I'd built, while they all laughed at me. It wasn't just that I had a real job. It was that I'd quietly become the linchpin holding their entire lifestyle together. Her eyes welled up. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she whispered. "Why didn't you tell them?" I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, speaking softly but firmly. "Because they never asked, Danielle. None of you ever asked. You all just assumed. You painted me as a punchline and left me there. Why would I offer a different version of myself when no one cared enough to ask for it?" She swallowed hard, clearly absorbing more than she wanted to. "But you kept helping. Why?" I let that question hang in the air for a second. It felt symbolic itself, that word "why," something none of them had asked me all these years, suddenly sitting there between us like a fragile truce. "Because they're family," I finally said, then added, or at least they were. Danielle buried her face in her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, something had shifted. "They want to meet," she said. "They're scared, Alex. They're talking about bankruptcy, about selling the house, about everything falling apart, and they're mad. They think you're doing this on purpose." I let that accusation roll past me without flinching. "Well," I said carefully, "in a way I am doing this on purpose. I'm just letting reality catch up with their illusions." Danielle winced. "They want you to come to dinner again, Sunday night. They'll all be there." A pause, then a subtle twist of the knife. "They think you're having a breakdown, that you're sabotaging yourself and them." There it was, the reflexive deflection. Even now, they couldn't admit they might be responsible for their own mess. They needed a villain, a scapegoat. And I was always available for that role, at least in their story. But not anymore. I smiled gently. "Tell them if they want answers, they can come meet me at work. My shift's at 8. I'll be behind the counter folding boxes like always. Let them come see the pizza guy in his natural habitat." Danielle hesitated. "At the pizza shop, are you serious?" I nodded, dead serious. She sighed deeply, then stood to leave. Before she walked out, she turned back. "They don't know about the payments, about what you've been doing. Should I tell them?" This was a real moment of risk, and I felt it deeply. A fork in the road. I could have ended the game right there, told her to lay it all bare, make them come crawling. But no. I wanted them to see it with their own eyes, to step into my world before realizing they'd been living in it all along. "No," I said softly. "Don't tell them. Let them figure it out when they show up." That night I sat by my window, staring out at the city skyline, all that steel and glass glittering in the darkness like a promise. In that moment, I realized the symbolism of the entire situation. They built their lives on appearances, while I built mine on substance. Their towers were hollow. Mine had solid foundations. My phone buzzed again around midnight, a single text from Danielle. "They'll be there. Sunday night, 8 p.m. I stared at the message, feeling a mixture of dread and strange exhilaration. The showdown was coming, and this time it would happen on my terms. As I set the phone down, I couldn't help but smile. For years, I'd been invisible in their eyes. The pizza guy, the basement dweller, the loser who never quite measured up. But now they were coming into my world. And they didn't even know how much they were about to learn. By Sunday afternoon, I felt strangely calm. The entire day, I kept waiting for that old anxiety to creep back in, that familiar knot in my chest whenever family tension built to a breaking point, but it never arrived. I knew who I was now. I knew exactly what I'd done, and more importantly, why I'd done it. My family's desperation wasn't about missing payments or declining credit scores. It was about watching their constructed image crumble. Their lifestyles had been propped up by a version of me they didn't even respect, and now that scaffolding was gone. That was why this meeting mattered. They needed to see the man they'd ignored standing in his uniform, folding pizza boxes, running deliveries, and quietly running circles around them the entire time. I showed up to work early. Rico, my manager, was already there, prepping dough, humming to himself in the back kitchen. He looked up as I walked in, gave me a wry grin. "So, tonight's the night, huh? You ready for this?" His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Rico always read people better than he let on. "Yeah," I said, tying my apron carefully. "I'm ready. Actually, I'm looking forward to it." I could feel the symbolism in every movement. The apron I slipped over my head, the same uniform my family mocked, was the perfect costume for this performance. Except tonight, I wasn't playing a part, I was owning it. I folded boxes methodically while watching the clock. At exactly 8:03 p.m., the doorbell jingled and they entered Mom, Dad, Chris, Josh, Danielle, even Aunt Stella. They looked wildly out of place among the plastic tables and bright fluorescent lights. Their expensive coats and polished shoes looked absurdly formal in this greasy little neighborhood pizza shop. They stood awkwardly near the entrance, their eyes flicking around like they couldn't quite process where they were. Rico caught my glance and gave a subtle nod, then retreated into the back kitchen, leaving me to it. The air was thick with tension, but I felt no rush to break the silence. I finished the box I was folding slowly, deliberately, then washed my hands with equal care before finally walking over. "Evening," I said casually. "Good to see everyone." Nobody spoke at first. I could see them all struggling to reconcile the man in front of them with the caricature they'd created. Mom looked like she'd been crying. Dad's face was tight and pale. Chris was already coiled, ready to snap. Josh avoided eye contact entirely. Danielle looked ashamed, maybe. It was hard to tell. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Alex," he began, "can we speak somewhere private?" I shook my head calmly. "Nope, we can talk right here or not at all." Chris exploded first. "You've been ignoring us for weeks. What the hell is going on with you? Are you behind all this? Why is everything falling apart all at once?" I smiled faintly and asked the question that cut straight to the heart of their panic. "Why would you think I could possibly be behind your finances falling apart?" "I'm just the pizza guy, remember? Josh, usually the peacemaker, stepped in next, trying a softer approach. Danielle found your company online," he said carefully. "Is it true? Is that your business? The payment processing thing?" I nodded once, meeting his gaze directly. The look on their faces in that moment, disbelief colliding with dawning realization, was almost worth the years of mockery I'd endured. Mom gasped audibly. Dad's jaw fell slack. Even Aunt Stella looked completely floored. The room fell completely silent for a long, heavy beat. Then Mom's voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever tell us? All these years, why keep it a secret?" I laughed softly, the bitterness tasting almost sweet now. "Because I did tell you. 6 years ago at a family dinner. Remember I tried explaining my concept to you, a platform to help small businesses with payments, cash flow operations. You all laughed. Dad called it another one of Alex's pipe dreams. Chris told me to get a real job. Mom, you just looked worried and asked if I was sure this was a good idea given my track record, so I stopped sharing. Why bother? You'd already written the story about me and you decided I was just the joke, the family disappointment. The weight of my words settled over them, but I wasn't finished. Remember that down payment for your house? Chris, ever wonder where that came from? That anonymous client gift of $130K, that was me. Chris froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I turned to Josh next. That last-minute loan forgiveness on your med school debt when your practice was about to collapse me again. Josh flushed deep red, shaking his head slightly as if trying to wake up from a dream. I pivoted toward Mom and Dad. And your roof, the one insurance, magically agreed to cover after they refused. Guess who paid that bill out of pocket? Me. The silence was profound now, almost oppressive. Then I twisted the knife. And I didn't tell you. Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I did it quietly. Anonymously. Because I thought, maybe that's what family does. You take care of each other. Chris suddenly found his voice. Predictably, it was angry. So, this was all some manipulative game. You secretly paid everyone's bills so you could throw it in our faces later. That's sick, Alex. That's really sick, Alex. I didn't flinch. No, Chris, what's sick is that none of you ever cared enough to ask what I actually do. What's sick is that I was keeping your financial lives afloat for years while you laughed at me for delivering pizzas. Danielle spoke quietly but with surprising clarity. He's right, she said, turning toward Chris and Josh. We never asked. We just assumed. That felt like a shift, subtle but real. For the first time, someone besides me acknowledged the truth. But Mom couldn't let go yet. She fell back on the old pattern, guilt as currency. We're your family, Alex. How could you just cut us off? You knew we needed help. How could you watch this happen to us? I met her gaze steadily, my voice calm and clear. Because at that dinner, your birthday, Mom, you all made it abundantly clear exactly how you see me. Not as someone worthy of respect or even curiosity, just as the punchline, the basement dweller, the loser, so I stopped helping. The symbolism of that pizza shop, that working-class blue-collar space where they'd never set foot before, was perfect. They were sitting now in the very world they'd mocked, finally realizing it was the same world that had quietly kept them afloat. Chris was seething. So what happens now? Is this where you hold us hostage? Make us beg for help? I shook my head. No. But I'm done giving anonymously. If any help happens going forward, it'll be on my terms and with transparency. No more secrecy, no more disrespect. And the joke stopped permanently. Stop. The emotional weight in the air was almost unbearable, but it felt right, necessary. For years I'd let them script my role. Not anymore. Finally, my nephew entered the shop. He must have gotten the address from Danielle. 16 years old and awkward, but smart and observant. He walked straight to me, ignoring his father completely. Uncle Alex, he said simply, I want to learn what you do. Could I maybe intern for your company this summer? That one sentence did more to heal me than any apology his father could have offered. Here was the next generation willing to ask, willing to learn, willing to see me. I nodded slowly, a small smile breaking across my face for the first time all evening. Yeah, I said quietly. Yeah, you can. I felt Dad's gaze then. It was a strange mixture of something like respect and something like fear. For the first time in my life, my father was looking at me as if he didn't know who I was and maybe had never really known. We need to talk again, he said finally. Somewhere private. Soon. Tomorrow, maybe? I held that moment gently in my mind as I took a slow breath. I'll think about it, I said. Then I added, but next time, you come to my office. And with that, I turned back to the pizza counter, folding another box, steady, calm, and finally free. Monday morning arrived, and with it came a quiet, determined energy. I rose before dawn, put on a fresh shirt, laced up, polished shoes, real business shoes, not scuffed sneakers, and walked the short distance to my office. No one knew yet, but this day was as much for me as it was for them. For years, my apartment had been a sanctuary of sorts, small but mine. But this space, my office, was different. It was a monument to everything I had built quietly, methodically, while they weren't watching. The building itself wasn't flashy, an old brick warehouse converted into a co-working space downtown, but my company's suite inside was clean, modern, and alive with the quiet hum of real work being done. I asked Allie, my receptionist, to prepare visitor badges and fresh coffee, and laid out folders on the glass conference table printouts of every single anonymous payment, every transaction where I had been their invisible benefactor, evidence organized neatly, indisputably. By 9:50 a.m., I got the text, we're outside. All of us. My nephew included, apparently. That surprised me, but pleasantly so. The kid was paying attention probably more than anyone else in that family ever had. I met them personally in the lobby, shaking hands with my father first, watching the surprise flicker across his face as he took in my clothes, my demeanor all so different from the pizza uniform they were used to seeing. Josh and Chris stood stiffly behind him, Aunt Stella trailing a step behind, awkward and unusually quiet. Mom's eyes darted nervously around the polished floors and the glass walls, clearly uncomfortable here, my world, not hers. Their silence as we rode the elevator up was thick with a new tension, respect maybe, or confusion at least. They had never pictured me here, that was part of the point. When we entered the conference room, their eyes landed immediately on the framed article on the wall. How this small startup quietly disrupted a billion-dollar industry, complete with my photo smiling a rare, genuine smile next to it. The symbolism was rich. Here they were seated at a table in a space built entirely on the work of the man they'd dismissed for decades. I didn't sit immediately. I stood at the head of the table and let the silence speak first. Dad cleared his throat, breaking first as always. Alex, this is really your company. I nodded, keeping my voice even. Yes, 6 years ago I tried to tell you. You weren't interested then. Josh sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. Chris crossed his arms tightly, face flushed, but silent. Mom looked at everything except me, clearly overwhelmed. Even Stella, always one for snide comments, seemed unable to speak. I finally spoke again, my voice calm but cutting. Everything you see here, the furniture, the computers, this glass table, all of it exists because of what you mocked as a pizza guy's dream. While you laughed, I built. And while you stumbled financially, I stepped in and fixed things quietly, anonymously. Not because you asked for help, but because I didn't want you to suffer. I thought, Maybe if I just kept being generous, eventually you'd see me, not as a joke, as a person. Mom finally looked up, tears in her eyes. Alex, we didn't know. I interrupted gently but firmly. That's the thing, Mom. You didn't want to know. You had your version of me and you clung to it because it made you feel better. I was the one who didn't live up to expectations. That was comforting, right? Because it meant your other sons looked better in comparison. Chris exploded first as expected. So what's this some moral lecture you brought us here to shame us? I stayed calm. No, Chris, I brought you here to give you clarity. To show you what really held your lives together all this time, and to explain the new rules going forward. Their faces froze at the word rules, even Dad stiffened visibly. That word didn't sit well with a man used to control. I sat down slowly, deliberately folding my hands in front of me, speaking carefully and clearly. From this point forward, any financial help I provide will come with terms formal documented and with clear repayment schedules. No more anonymous gifts, no more mystery transfers. You'll know exactly what I'm contributing and why. And you'll respect it in me, or I'll stop immediately and permanently. Josh leaned forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was softer than I expected. Alex, I'm sorry. Really, I didn't realize. I didn't think. That's the problem, Josh, I said gently. You didn't think? None of you did. A heavy pause followed. Dad looked around the room, clearly shaken, before finally locking eyes with me. Is this really necessary? We're family. Shouldn't that matter more than contracts? I smiled, slightly leaning back in my chair. Family. That's funny coming from the man who sat at that restaurant and laughed while Mom joked about me delivering pizzas at 35. Who never once asked what I actually did for a living. Who let that narrative about me fester because it made everyone else look better. Dad's face flushed deeply. For once he had no easy comeback. Then the unexpected twist, my nephew spoke up, his voice clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. Uncle Alex, can I intern here this summer? I want to learn from you, not from them. Every head turned toward him, stunned. I stared at him a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I said quietly. You can. That one sentence was the real symbol in the room. A generational shift. A fracture in the family dynamic itself. The boy who once parroted their jokes about me now saw me differently. He was the first in that family to voluntarily step into my world with curiosity instead of judgment. Chris's face twisted in fury. You're manipulating him now too. I laughed softly, not mocking, just weary. No, Chris, I'm giving him a choice, something none of you ever gave me. That broke something in Dad finally. He sagged visibly, suddenly looking older than I'd ever seen him. Alex, he said quietly, are you happy? I mean, really happy? The question surprised me. Not because he asked it, but because I realized I had an answer. I am, I said simply. Not because of the money or the company or the success. I'm happy because I stopped living for your approval. That was the true twist. Not that I had built a successful company in secret, not that I had quietly held their lives together for years, but that I no longer needed them emotionally, financially, or psychologically. The meeting ended quietly after that. Josh and Danielle shook my hand solemnly before leaving. Mom and Dad lingered a little longer but had nothing more to say. Aunt Stella slipped out silently, clearly uncomfortable with the entire scene. Chris stormed out last, his face thunderous, his pride in tatters. My nephew stayed behind for a few extra minutes, asking tentative questions about the company's software, its clients, and what kind of projects he might work on. He was curious, eager, respectful, and it felt strangely healing. When they were all gone, I sat alone in the glass-walled conference room, looking out over the office floor where my small but capable team worked quietly, unaware of the emotional battle that had just played out in this very space. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. But I also knew this wasn't the end. There would be fallout. Chris would fight back in his own way. Dad might try to repair things or might retreat into silent disappointment again. Mom's tears might turn to cold distance later. But none of that could touch me now. Because this meeting hadn't been about proving myself to them. It had been about proving something to myself. That I could finally sit at my own table at the head of it and define the terms of every relationship in my life. As I rose to leave the room, my phone buzzed. A text from Rico. How did the big family meeting go? I smiled, typed back a single word, done. And I meant it. Or, at least I thought I did. Because just as I stepped into my office lobby, my phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. It was Chris. His message was short. We're not done. Chris's message, we're not done, sat on my screen like a threat. The simplicity of it almost made me laugh. Typical Chris, boiling everything down to confrontation, ego, and unfinished business. But the truth was, I didn't fear him anymore. His control over me, over how I saw myself, how I defined my worth, had ended the moment he walked into my pizza shop and realized I was running circles around him, financially, emotionally, intellectually. But that didn't mean I was naive. Chris wasn't one to take a loss quietly. He would circle back, find angles, try to reclaim ground. That's who he'd always been, not a listener, not a learner, but a competitor, desperate to win, even when he didn't understand the rules of the game. I poured myself a whiskey that night, sat in my living room, staring out at the city lights, and let the weight of the last few days settle. Every childhood slight, every condescending glance, every Thanksgiving where my chair felt a little further from the center of the table, it was all part of this long, slow education. They had taught me something after all. How to endure, how to build quietly without applause, how to sharpen the edge of my mind in the shadows while they played for the crowd. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I finally closed my laptop and texted Rico. Might need coverage for my shift tomorrow, family fallout inbound. His reply was immediate, as if he'd been waiting up to, no problem, boss, handle your business. The irony of that boss made me grin. Rico knew exactly who I was, even if my family didn't. The next day around noon, Chris called directly. No texts, no posturing, just a blunt phone call. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was tight-clipped. Can we meet just us today? For a split second, I almost said no. I didn't owe him anything. But then that familiar part of me stirred, not the desperate to please part, but the curious part. I wanted to know what his play was, what angle he thought he still had. Fine, I said. My office, 1 o'clock, don't bring anyone. He arrived early, of course he did, and I watched him from the glass wall as he stood in the reception area looking distinctly uncomfortable. The suit he wore felt almost like a costume now, a symbol of the image he had clung to for so long. Allie handed him a visitor badge and pointed toward the conference room without needing me to intervene. Even she knew this wasn't a casual client meeting. I let him sit alone for 5 minutes before I entered. Another small exercise in control, my turf, my tempo. Chris didn't waste time. As soon as I sat, he leaned forward, voice low but intense. Alex, I need to explain something. You've misunderstood all of this. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, enlighten me. He took a breath, clearly rehearsing whatever speech he thought might work. Look, growing up. Dad pushed all of us hard. You know that. He expected perfection from me and Josh too. And yeah, I teased you, we all did, but it wasn't because we hated you. It was how we kept score, how we coped with the pressure. I stayed silent, let him talk. You were always different, he continued. You didn't care about the rules Dad set. You didn't measure yourself by the same standards. And honestly, that made us jealous. We laughed at you because we didn't understand you. We thought you'd failed, but you didn't. You just played a different game. That last sentence almost landed, almost. But I saw what he was doing. This wasn't an apology, it was a justification dressed up as invite. He wanted to frame it as a misunderstanding, as if all those years of being dismissed, laughed at, diminished, could now be washed away with this tidy explanation. That's very eloquent, I said evenly. But let's be clear, Chris, you didn't tease me, you disrespected me consistently, publicly, privately, and not just you, the entire family reinforced that narrative. I became the scapegoat so the rest of you could feel superior, even when you were quietly drowning financially, and I was quietly rescuing you. His jaw tightened. Okay, he said. Fine, then let's talk about now. What do you want? What's the price for fixing this? You've made your point, Alex. You win. So, what's it going to cost? I laughed out loud at that. The absurdity of it. Even after everything, he still thought this was about leverage negotiation money. This isn't about money, Chris, I said gently. This is about dignity, about respect, about finally reclaiming the narrative you and the others wrote for me before I even had a chance to define myself. He didn't understand. I could see it. He was still framing this as a transaction, not a transformation. So I laid it out clearly, carefully, calmly. I'm not going to bail you out, Chris, not this time. If you want financial help, you'll have to earn it like anyone else. Pitch me a business plan. Show me a sustainable strategy. Offer me terms I can believe in. I'm not your brother in that context anymore. I'm a potential investor. Treat me accordingly. The symbolism of that shift was deliberate. The roles had flipped. I was no longer the youngest brother looking for approval. I was the CEO, the gatekeeper, the decision maker. He stared at me a long time, and for once I think he finally grasped the depth of the change, but it's egg. He wasn't used to seeing me like this, calm, direct, unapologetic. Then he surprised me. You know what hurts the most, he said quietly. That nephew of yours, my son, he's been talking about you nonstop since the pizza shop. He wants to be like you now. He doesn't look at me the same way anymore. His voice cracked on that last line, and for a fleeting moment I saw the real Chris, not the arrogant lawyer, not the bully, but a man afraid he was losing his place in his own son's eyes. That was the final twist neither of us had expected. I softened just slightly. Maybe this is his chance to break the cycle, I said gently. To grow up seeing a different way to measure worth. Chris nodded, slowly stood without shaking my hand, and left the room. There was no resolution, no neat closure, just a quiet, complicated fracture. After he left, I sat in that conference room a long time. The symbolism of that moment wasn't lost on me, the polished glass table reflecting my image back at me. No one else's narrative, just mine. In the following days, texts trickled in from other family members. Some apologies, vague, awkward, but there. Some silences too, the kind of silence that says, I don't know how to rebuild this, so I'm just going to stay quiet. I welcomed both. And my nephew. He came to the office that Friday afternoon for his unofficial internship interview. He showed up nervous but eager, holding a notebook and peppering me with questions about software architecture, payment platforms, and startup culture. I smiled and answered every one. He wasn't carrying their judgments, their insecurities, their projections. He was curious, but that alone made the entire journey worth it. As I walked him out that evening, he paused at the door. Uncle Alex, my dad's really upset. But I'm glad you're you. That hit me harder than any apology Chris could have offered. Thanks, kid, I said quietly. That means a lot. And when I locked the door behind him, I realized the full truth. I didn't need the rest of the family to come around. I didn't need them to validate me, apologize perfectly, or repair all the broken years. I was whole now because I finally saw myself clearly. Their laughter, their ignorance, their judgment, it had all forged me, quietly, relentlessly. And while they were playing their game, I had been building mine. In the end, the pizza boxes, the basement jokes, the cheap shots, they were just noise. The real work was done in silence. And now, it was done. Or maybe finally it was just beginning. Story 2. I never imagined I'd be the kind of guy pouring my marriage into pixels on the internet. But here I am typing through tears and clenched teeth because writing it down is cheaper than therapy. Dr. Santos says it'll help me heal. She didn't say it'd feel like ripping out my heart, but what do therapists know? My name is Ethan Marshall, and I'm 35. 6 years ago, I married Rebecca Nguyen, 33, the smartest person I've ever met. She could quote case law before she could tie her own shoes. I was fresh out of a master's program in computer science, ready to launch my cloud security startup with my college roommate and business partner, Mark Jacobs. We met on a freezing night outside Park City, Utah. My old Range Rover had died in a blizzard that closed every road in and out. I was stranded, shivering, and 3 hours late for a client pitch in Salt Lake City. Every tow truck was booked. Every mechanic shop was dark except one run by a woman whose name tag read, Becca. She was under pressure cables and frostbite alone in the shop while I froze on the porch. 10 minutes after I climbed inside her dingy garage, Becca popped the hood, inspected the frozen fuel lines, and had me back on the road before sunrise. All she charged me was a coffee and a smile. While I waited for the warm-up, we talked for hours, her voice calm over the hum of idling engines. She was finishing her last year of law school at night and working full shifts as the only mechanic in that town by day. She wanted to move into human rights law, ambitious, gentle, and stunning with dark hair that fell in soft layers across her face. I was sold. That weekend turned into a 6-month romance on long phone calls and snow-dusty visits. When she graduated and passed the bar, she moved to Denver to join a prestigious firm. I set up in a tiny office downtown working around the clock on our beta launch. Mark handled the code. I handled the sales. Together we built Skylock Solutions, offering zero-trust cloud security to small businesses. Biotech startups, family vineyards, local clinics, you name it. By the time we celebrated our first wedding anniversary, Rebecca was already a rising star at Harrison & Lee LLP, thanks to her sharp mind and softer touch with clients. I paid for her tuition. She cheered me on through every investor pitch. We were a team. Life felt like a symphony in those first years. Friday game nights at Mark's Loft, monthly dinners with my parents Susan and Robert Marshall at our favorite Italian place, bike rides on Sundays, or staying in our condo binge-watching sci-fi shows under a pile of blankets. Even Mrs. Ortiz, our sweet neighbor, would knock on our door with fresh cookies and ask if I'd given Rebecca her birthday card yet. Then January came. It started small. Late nights at the office on Tuesdays. Just Tuesdays always. I chalked it up to a big case she was working on. Law firms eat their young, I told myself. But then the little things crept in. Passwords changed without warning. My desk lamp would click off at midnight even when I swore I left it on. She started taking showers as soon as she got home, leaving towels on the floor and the bathroom smelling of that hotel shampoo she'd never used. And her phone would light up in my pocket with a text that vanished before I could read it. I'm not quick to jump to conclusions. I waited, I watched, and then I did what any paranoid tech guy would do. I logged into our shared banking app. I found recurring charges, 8 straight months at the Marriott downtown, always on a Tuesday for one room. always fully prepaid under the name Daniel Lee, her senior partner at the firm. Married, 2 kids, the perfect facade. My heart froze harder than that Utah night. I didn't lash out. I collected evidence. PDF bank statements, hotel receipts, a spreadsheet matching her calendar invites to his check-in times. I cross-referenced her working late texts to clients with Marriott check-in alerts. Then I dug up our prenup ironclad infidelity clause section, 8.2b, mutual forfeiture of joint assets. Funny how she insisted on that when my company started booming. I sat on that knowledge for weeks, heart pounding every time the phone buzzed. I still had hope, stupid as it sounds. I wanted to confront her as soon as I had proof, but I also needed the perfect moment. So I waited for a Tuesday. On that 8th Tuesday, I stayed late at our condo, pretending to tinker with code, while Rebecca slipped out whispering, "I'll be back soon." I tracked her with Skylock's VPN logs. Her laptop pinged a Starbucks network downtown at 10:13 p.m. Guess who lives 2 blocks from me? I confronted him first. I showed Daniel the hotel folio on my phone, his name clear as day. He froze, played dumb, then blurted out that he'd been meeting Rebecca to discuss a potential case strategy. His lawyer brain glazed straight over to damage control. He promised me no affair, just innocent late nights. In his apology, he left everything open, texts, emails, all ripe for the picking. That night, I lay awake next to Rebecca's empty side of the bed. I stared at her framed law school diploma, at the wedding photo of us under fairy lights. I wondered when she stopped seeing me in the same way I saw her. What part of our partnership ended up on that Marriott playlist? I called her best friend Priya Patel, who worked in the same office. She was stunned but sympathetic. She handed me more texts, screenshots. He told me he loved her, Priya whispered over the coffee, said he'd leave his wife for her. The next morning, I kept my face calm. I loaded extra files to my laptop. Then while she showered, I transferred every dollar from our joint accounts into safety net accounts only I could access completely by the book thanks to that prenup clause. At 11:43 a.m., I got my answer, a single text. "You're dead to me. I'm taking everything." I laughed louder than I expected. I texted back, "Check your bank balance." 3 minutes later, her shock hit my phone in the form of frantic messages that warned me she'd dispute the prenup. I replied with a photo of Section 8.2b clause, highlighted in yellow. She called. Her voice shook with rage and betrayal. Rage, not sorrow. Rage. She demanded how I could destroy her life, her career. I told her she chose this. She hung up. I leaned back in my chair. I opened Skylock's dashboard. My system logs showed an attempted login from a device traced to her home IP. At 1:17 p.m., I blocked her, changed passwords, locked her out. And then I called the one person I knew would have my back mark. He dropped everything. Said, "You did the right thing." He came over with pizza boxes bigger than my head. We toasted to justice with diet sodas. That evening, my phone buzzed again. 35 unread emails, bank freeze notices. "Dad, you okay from Susan? Thinking of you from Priya? I'll file a restraining order first thing from my lawyer, Angela Ruiz. I'm still here." The condo is quiet. The bed is half empty. I feel every ache in my chest and every pulse in my temples. But I also feel a spark I haven't felt in years. Clarity, control, the simple thrill of standing up for myself. Tomorrow I'll tell her family what I know, and then I'll decide if I want to watch her crash against her own storm or help pick up the pieces. Either way, I'm done waiting. When I dialed Rebecca's parents that evening, my hands still trembled from the adrenaline. I imagined her mother's gentle face the way she'd coo sweetheart whenever I asked about their Buddhist temple's donation drives, and I wondered if she'd ever suspected the storm brewing under our calm. I left a voice message. I told them I had proof of Rebecca's betrayal, that I knew about her secret meetings and the Marriott folios, leaving out only the raw edges so they'd call me back before they judged me too harshly. In that silence after I hung up, I realized I was standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and wedding photos. The golden frame of our engagement shot glinted in the overhead light, mocking me with promises I'd already broken. I couldn't decide if I was braver or more foolish for sharing this with her family before confronting her. My phone buzzed her father's number. I answered, my voice caught between remorse and vindication, and heard him say, "Ethan, we need to talk face to face." The line went dead, and I felt that old panic, the first crack in my newfound armor, as I realized I'd just invited an uncharted reckoning into my home. The next morning, I met them at a coffee shop on Colfax Avenue, chosen because nobody would recognize Rebecca's parents there. They arrived like a small parade, her father steadfast and polite, her mother eyes red-rimmed. And then Rebecca's younger brother, Jason, whose presence felt like the unexpected chord in a familiar song. I sat across from them, my palms flat on the table, and laid out the evidence photocopies of charges, screenshots, dates neatly typed on a sheet that felt like a contract with my own heartbreak. Her dad inhaled sharply as though he'd been punched in the gut, and her mom reached out to grip my arm, whispering, "We had no idea." Jason watched me with something like pity, or maybe relief, it was hard to tell. As the coffee cooled between us, I realized how little any of this mattered to the wider world. Our marriage was just another statistic in divorce court, another cautionary tale about ambition and trust. Yet here, between those chipped ceramic mugs and passing baristas, it felt apocalyptic. Her father finally said he'd talk to Rebecca, would try to get her to come home. That word home felt strange. Our home wasn't hers anymore. I stood up, gathering my papers, as her mother begged, "Please don't hate her." Hate wasn't the word flashing in my mind. But as I left them there, murmuring plans and apologies, I saw city buses rumble past carrying strangers to their own dramas, and I felt the hollow echo of a life I no longer recognized looming behind me. Back at my condo, I flipped on the smart lock's camera feed and watched Rebecca's father and Jason drive away in their gray sedan, a motion that felt like an exorcism. I took a deep breath, lightheaded from the confrontation, and realized I'd been holding my breath since last Tuesday. I paced the living room, eyes catching on the giant fractured mirror we'd bought at IKEA for $50, a jagged crack sliced through Rebecca's reflection, leaving my side intact. I remembered pledging vows in front of that mirror, promising to protect her even if the world turned upside down. Now that promise felt absurd. I thought about hiring a private investigator, someone who could predict her next move, but half of me recoiled at the idea of stalking the person who once shared my life. Instead, I opened a fresh document and started drafting emails to our top 10 clients, distilling my apology and reassurance into plain English. I'm resolving an urgent personal matter. Your security is still my top priority. Every sentence bit into me like an admission of weakness, but it was riskier to let rumors fester in the marketplace. As I hit send, the screen flashed delivered, and a new message popped up, a calendar invite titled Family Intervention set for tomorrow at 6 p.m. I stared at it, wondering if I still believed in fate, or if I was just trapped by everyone else's expectations. That afternoon, I slipped into the Skylock office for what felt like the first time since everything blew up. Mark greeted me with a fist bump that almost made me snap and bark at him, but I managed to grin instead. We huddled in the conference room, 3 walls lined with whiteboards scrawled in code snippets, and talked through the emergency plan, rotate our client contacts, rerun vulnerability scans, lock down every token. I watched Mark jot down notes, watched the certainty in his eyes, and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since launching our first beta determination. When we installed a new multi-factor authentication system on my laptop, I realized it wasn't just an act of professional self-preservation. It was symbolic. I was reclaiming the part of myself Rebecca had tried to hijack. But as the download bar crept toward completion, my phone buzzed again. A news alert: a Denver blog had picked up rumors about an illicit affair at Harrison & Lee LLP. The headline read, "Top Attorney's Private Life in Public Crosshairs." I shut my laptop, the new security protocols and client calls forgotten for a moment, and thought, if it gets out that the ex-CFO of a security firm can't secure his own life, what's left of my credibility? The barista called out our coffee order, and I realized the real test wasn't in code or contracts, it was in standing up under the weight of public scrutiny. That night, I sat on the balcony with my parents in mind, how they drove 3 hours to hold my hand. How my mom's eyes burned with worry, and I cradled a packet of incense sticks my grandmother sent from Laos. The smoke curled into the dark sky, carrying prayers of protection. I struck a match, lit the bundle, and watched sparks vanish. The ritual felt meaningless and necessary both at once. I whispered into the smoke, I need to believe in something beyond myself. I thought of the temple where Rebecca's family prayed for harmony, wondered if their faith would forgive her, but not forget. My phone glowed with a message from Angela, court date set, evidence briefing, Monday 9 a.m. My heart galloped like a faulty train engine. I realized this wasn't just about property or reputation. It was a clash of beliefs, of vows, broken of the idea that love and trust are sacred. In the distance, a siren wailed, a reminder that in this city, crises never sleep. I exhaled smoke trailing from my lips and braced myself. Tomorrow I'd walk into that courtroom alone, armed only with my truth, and pray it was enough. By Monday morning, my mind had spun itself into knots, replaying every word I'd said to Rebecca's family, every second of the confrontation with her father, the guilt that gnawed at me when I said, I'll never be the same person again. I hated how easily it slipped out like it was the truth. My body felt heavier with each passing hour, like a weight I couldn't shrug off. But there was no going back now. The emails I'd sent to clients, the call to the lawyer, the security breach I'd caught, everything was falling into place. I wasn't just fighting for my business anymore, Thabix. I was fighting for the core of who I'd been before all of this, the guy who believed in trust and loyalty. The same guy who once thought love was a team sport. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the city skyline, trying to feel something beyond the suffocating dread crawling under my skin. In the distance, the soft hum of traffic felt like a cruel reminder that life moved on no matter how much I wanted it to freeze. The court hearing was set for 10 a.m., and all I could think of was how much I hated the idea of walking into that room with Rebecca, or rather the woman who had used every ounce of my trust to destroy me. When I sat down in the lawyer's office later, Angela didn't waste time with pleasantries. She handed me a folder thick with evidence, a mix of financial documents, emails, and texts that painted a clear picture of the woman I once called my wife. But the worst part wasn't the facts. It was knowing that all of this, every strategy, every piece of malicious planning had been created and executed under my nose, while I was busy living a life that felt normal, that felt like it was supposed to be forever. Angela's words barely cut through my thoughts. She spoke about the prenup, the stolen intellectual property, the legal consequences for Rebecca and Justin, and yet I found myself searching her face for any sign that this could be undone, that I could somehow wake up from this nightmare. But there was no reprieve. It was real, and today was the day I would put it in front of a judge. My chest tightened, 1,000 thoughts racing through me. If I stood up in front of that judge, would I feel powerful or hollow? Would I finally be able to shut off the voice in my head that still loved her? Despite everything, I leaned back in my chair and tried to steady my breathing, but it felt impossible. The courtroom would be a battleground, and I was ready to face it, knowing I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The judge was sitting at the head of a long, sterile table when I walked in. Rebecca was already there, her eyes bloodshot, her lawyer beside her. A thin man with a high forehead and thin lips that never seemed to relax. Justin was nowhere to be seen, which didn't surprise me. He was probably too busy trying to cover his own skin, avoiding the consequences of his own actions. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of every single lie hanging in the air. The door creaked shut behind me as Angela placed the evidence on the table with a deliberate thud. I caught Rebecca's eye for a split second. The woman who once looked at me like I was her future now stared at me with disdain, her lips pinched in a tight line. The coldness in her eyes made my stomach churn. How did we go from planning a life together to sitting in a courtroom fighting over the scraps of a ruined marriage? The judge barely looked up. He cleared his throat, reminding everyone of the proceedings, but all I could think about was how much I hated this, how much I hated the idea of seeing her in the same room after everything. Rebecca's lawyer spoke first, outlining their side of the case, some nonsense about my business practices, and how I had allegedly hidden assets, making this divorce unfair. But I didn't flinch. I knew better than to let those words get to me. I had the facts, and I had proof. My heart pounded harder when it was my turn to speak. The words felt stuck, lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat. Angela nodded at me, a silent encouragement to keep going. I leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table, and began. I could feel the eyes on me, the judge, Rebecca's lawyer, and most of all Rebecca, who was sitting there like a stone. I told the story. I told them about the hotel receipts, the fraudulent business plan Rebecca had been crafting with Justin, the way she'd used our lives as pawns in a game that was never supposed to be hers to control. The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca's eyes flickered, but there was no remorse in her expression. Just cold, calculated defense. And then when I thought I was done, when I thought I'd bared everything, I pulled out the final card. I handed the judge the emails from the Blackstone Ventures executives, the ones that detailed how they'd been in direct communication with Rebecca and Justin for years, working together to dismantle my company from the inside out. Rebecca shifted in her seat, her hand trembling ever so slightly. For the first time in months, I saw a crack in her armor, a flicker of something human beneath her professional facade. The judge sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the evidence, his face unreadable. The room was still, and for a moment I wondered what it must feel like to have everything unravel so completely in front of you, to have the life you've built, your career, your reputation, your future torn apart by someone you trusted more than anyone else. But then the door behind me opened with a soft squeak and Justin stepped in. His shoulders slumped, his tie askew. He looked like a man who'd lost everything and knew it. His eyes met mine for the briefest of moments, and I swear there was something almost defeated in his gaze. Not remorse, not apology, but a sense of finality, like he realized he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The air thickened with tension as he took a seat next to Rebecca. His voice was low when he spoke, but I heard every word clearly. "I can't keep running from this," he said. "I was a part of it all, and it's time I faced the consequences." My heart skipped a beat. For the first time, Justin was owning up to what he'd done. It was a twist I wasn't expecting, but the words that followed nearly made me choke. "Rebecca," he said barely above a whisper. "I can't protect you anymore. You're on your own." The room seemed to collapse in on itself. Rebecca's face drained of color, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't the one drowning. It was her turn to face the fallout. The courtroom felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of everything that had been laid bare. Rebecca's head was down now, her shoulders slumped, but there was no sign of guilt in her eyes, just the same cold mask, the one I'd spent years trying to pierce. Justin's confession had left the room in a stunned silence, a silence that stretched longer than I could handle. The judge had turned to me, his face an unreadable stone, as if he expected some kind of final statement. But I didn't know what to say. What more could be said that hadn't already been shredded by facts and betrayal? I was tired of explaining the past, tired of defending something that had never really been mine to begin with. Tired of this absurd dance of pretending we could fix things when the foundation had been cracked years ago. I glanced at Rebecca, and for a split second, I really saw her as if I were seeing her for the first time since everything fell apart. That thin, fragile woman I thought was my partner, my equal, had become something else, a stranger who had carefully calculated every step of her destruction. And yet there was still a part of me buried deep beneath the anger that wanted to reach out, that wanted to tell her everything could be fixed. I pushed it down. I had no more fight left for that version of her, the one I'd believed in. The moment she made her choice, I made mine. I knew it wasn't over. This courtroom battle was just the start. As the judge called for a recess, I stood up, my legs feeling heavier with each step. Rebecca didn't look up, but I knew she was aware of my every move. The distance between us felt like an ocean now, and I was no longer sure I had the strength to swim through it. The weight of the truth was a burden, one I was only just beginning to understand. Justin caught up to me as I was leaving the room. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. There was no doubt now that he was the one who had initiated this fall from grace. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at him, and for the first time I realized how much of a coward he was. A coward who didn't have the guts to admit what he'd done until it was too late. "Save it," I said, my voice low. "You've made your bed, Justin. I'm done." I turned and walked out of the courtroom without another word, leaving him standing there, still tangled in his own web of lies and regret. The cool air hit me as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the sun dipping low in the sky. Everything was changing, and it didn't seem real. A few days ago, I was in love with the woman who had shattered my world. Now I was just trying to pick up the pieces. It's funny how much can change in such a short time, how quickly everything you thought you knew can fall apart. And yet, in the midst of it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. There was no turning back, no more secrets, no more lies. I was finally free from the weight of her choices, free from the suffocating illusion of control I'd let her have over my life. But that didn't mean I was happy about it. I was still grieving, still caught in the dissonance of it all. The woman I had shared my hopes and dreams with, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was now my adversary. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this really the end? The ride home was a blur. I barely remembered getting into the car, barely remembered the quiet hum of the engine as I made my way back to the condo. My mind kept replaying every conversation I'd had with her, every quiet moment we'd shared. I tried to hold on to those memories, the good ones, but they felt like ghosts now haunting me from a life I no longer had. I reached the condo, and everything felt alien. The silence of it was suffocating. It used to be our space. Now it felt like a prison, a cage that held my regrets and failures. I dropped my keys onto the counter, running a hand through my hair, trying to clear my thoughts. I knew I had to prepare for the next phase: divorce proceedings, civil suits, and 100 other things I couldn't bear to think about. But there was something else pressing on me, something that had been gnawing at me since the day I found out about her betrayal. What about the business? Skylock had been my dream. It was more than a company. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. Rebecca and Justin had tried to destroy it, to strip away the very thing that had defined me for years. But it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about proving that I could rebuild, that I could come out of this mess and make something stronger. I wasn't going to let them win. As I stood in the empty condo, the weight of everything hit me in waves. But there was something else underneath it all, something more than just anger, more than just bitterness. There was a determination to move forward, to rise above it. I had to. For myself. For the life I'd worked so hard to build. I glanced at the empty wall where we had once hung our wedding picture, and something inside me cracked. No matter how much I wanted to scream, I stayed silent. The only way forward was to take a breath, face the future, and let go of everything I thought I knew. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that the worst was still ahead. I had won in court today, but the battle was far from over. There were still loose ends to tie up, still a future to rebuild, and I wasn't sure if I could trust myself to make the right choices anymore. But the one thing I was sure of was that I would never let her dictate my future again. I was done with Rebecca. It was time to take my life back. Tomorrow the real fight would begin.